Welcome to the Travelpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Megan McSwain. Today, I'm joined by Richard Valtr, the founder of Mews. Richard is on a mission to transform the hospitality industry through cutting-edge cloud solutions and is a pioneer at the intersection of technology and hospitality. Hello, Richard. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Megan. Great to be here.
So let's talk about Mews. Can you share a little bit about your journey from starting off in the hospitality industry to founding Mews?
Yeah, so I always like to talk about myself as a frustrated hotelier. I think my main journey to actually trying to figure out how I could, create a completely new kind of operating system for hotels and hospitality really comes from all of the nights that I spent as a night porter or a kind of night receptionist, during my summer holidays, being kind of 16, 17. So while all of my friends were having the great times, I was basically running the night audit and not getting paid for it because it was my family's hotel. So that's really kind of like the two compounding things. It's also one of the reasons why Mews doesn't have a night audit. And we thought to kind of completely automate that process. But no, I started the company. I've been thinking about it for a long time, as I say, like ever since I was about 16, 17, of how all of this could actually kind of work, how we would have a system that would actually, rather than be somewhere where you just input all of the data, that the data collection somehow would happen automatically. So you could really, really just focus on the guest and on the guest experience and all of those things that I think make people really excited about hospitality and the reason why people actually want to work in hotels and restaurants and all of these things, because it's such a fundamentally human industry that I don't think anyone gets excited about, running lots of reports and typing in all of the different fields that they've had, instructed by their manager or by printing out basically and stapling all of the credit card receipts and things like that. Those are things that I don't think get you excited about hospitality. I think it's, right, the idea of talking to guests, being able to kind of understand where they're from, being able to show them, your town or what's so great about, all of the different things that you could actually kind of do. I think that's when you get people who are especially young, who are just really excited about hospitality. And I think that that's really kind of where I came at it from. So I started the company in 2012. I didn't think that I was building a PMS at first. I really thought that I was building something that would sit on top of a PMS and would just be this kind of productivity tool. On the one side, it would help guests personalize their journey. On the other side, it would work like a kind of super smart kind of AI enabled task manager, which would just, make sure that all of those personalized journeys were somehow being carried out by the orchestra of people. And I realized that there was no system that could actually kind of facilitate that. So that's when we started building it.
You've clearly been in this industry for a long time. You said you were a teenager when you just sort of probably started thinking, God, I wish there was something here that would do this so I didn't have to do it and I could be out with my friends. So that's so interesting. But what sparked your passion? I mean, clearly you've been doing this because it was your family's business, but what sparked your passion specifically for technology and service? Because like you said, it is the least fun part of hospitality, right? The fun part is the people and the traveling and the beautiful places. But what kind of made you think, well, this is what I want to do? Kind of sounds boring, right?
I think three things that somehow kind of came together. So my mother is the entrepreneur of the family. She's the one who kind of got the family into kind of real estate development and into hotel development. My father was a programmer or a computer programmer. So I've always been quite close to technology and I've always kind of had those two things. I then decided to go and study philosophy, which to a certain extent, basically kind of, if you take all of those things, I think they somehow made me go the direction of wanting to be an entrepreneur who could kind of rethink how these things were done, basically maybe from first principles. And the fact that I'd kind of always been close to technology and knew how to code made it seem that technology could actually help with this kind of process. And I think that we have a concept in Mews, which we call, it's a terrible name, but we call it user disengagement. And it's this idea that technology should actually be letting us do things in a much, much quicker way so that you don't have to use a screen, so that you don't actually need to kind of use a mouse or use a keyboard to actually interact with something. The technology should be smart enough to pick up on all of those signals so that you can actually do the kind of the human work, which is,
Right.
actually talking to guests, doing all of those things. And somehow all of those things are actually running in the background. And in
Right.
order to do that, you really need, a lot of AI, a lot of really, really smart computing to be able to do that, because those are some of the hardest challenges in technology. But that's how technology within hospitality should be applied. You shouldn't need a desktop in front of you,
Right.
because if you need a desktop, then that means that you always need a barrier between yourselves and the guests. And that's just the least hospitable thing that you could actually ever do. So
That's true.
I'm a huge believer in the fact that technology can remove those types of barriers and remove those types of borders. And that's why I'm just so passionate about it.
Well, that's great. And break it down for me. How are Muse's cloud solutions actually reshaping the guest experience and the day-to-day operations for a hotel operator?
Yeah, so we really kind of started off in, one of the first products that we ever built was a check-in application for guests. And we've now kind of created that, it's part of the PMS basically is this check-in guest journey application. And it's a web app. It's not actually anything that you download, but it's really where the guest can actually kind of configure their journey. They can actually kind of provide all of the things that you need during the check-in process. And in some hotels where they, for example, have a mobile key enabled, that's the part of the journey that usually happens at a reception desk. You can actually kind of do that prior to arrival, the same way that you would if you're going and boarding a flight or something like that. You can do that with check-in, you can do that with checkout, but you can also kind of, there's messaging in there that we built in, straight away, where you can actually kind of chat to anyone actually kind of at the hotel. So you can start configuring your journey. So the idea for us is that the journey doesn't actually just start at the moment of check-in. The moment of check-in is actually basically kind of post that moment of booking, goes all the way to the time when you want to say goodbye to that guest. So rather than a checkout, you kind of have a welcoming procedure and a goodbye procedure. And anything in between is just completely automated. So we think about, what are the ways that we can completely automate parts of that journey for anyone actually working in the hotel? So the idea of user disengagement basically goes all the way through to how do we make sure that anyone who manages the hotel, they don't need to look at thousands of reports. They only really look at the notifications when things are going against plan or things are basically not going according to the way that they've thought about things. So those are really the ways that we think about kind of reshaping this industry. And what you'll find is, in all of the hotels that use Mews, and it's roughly about almost 1 million rooms basically that we have now that are
Wow.
being kind of operated and helped with Mews. Those types of hotels are actually spending much less time with technology, with reporting, with all of these different things, basically actually kind of performing check-ins and things like that. And they're spending most of their time actually with guests and on facilitating that guest journey.
This episode is brought to you by travelpayments.com. Travel businesses have unique needs when it comes to credit card processing. From large average ticket sizes and tolerance for higher chargeback ratios to simple integrations with the most popular shopping cart systems, the travel industry specialists at travelpayments.com have you covered. Unfortunately, many of the most popular credit card processors initially accept travel businesses, but without warning, freeze their merchant accounts and the thousands of dollars in them because these service providers don't understand or support the unique needs of travel industry business. Don't get stuck with one of the big guys who will freeze you out without a moment's notice. Instead, work with the travel industry specialists who will support your business every step of the way. Visit travelpayments.com to get a free quote today.
Now, does this apply to hotels like where there isn't someone there waiting for you to check in? You just have checked in and you're good to go. Okay. Wow.
Well, so I basically always thought that, the first application of Mews was at a boutique hotel. And, I thought that the way that this would actually kind of work is that you automate every single thing so you can really, really actually have really kind of cozy relationship with the guest. That person comes in, you're talking to them as a friend because you already know them, you've already talked to them basically online. And that was really the kind of the vision. But I think the first hotels that really could utilize all of this technology and the way that we architected the system were kind of limited service hotels. So there are hotels that run on Mews that basically just do not have a reception desk, basically. There's, for example, one of our favorite hotels is one where there's only one receptionist that basically ever works at the hotel. What you get is a kind of a wristband that functions as both your key, but also as the kind of the main payment that you're doing. So when you're, for example, they have, let's say, a little place where you can actually kind of pour your own beer and things like that in the lobby. And that's all activated basically by this wristband. So there are concepts that work on Mews where the people that operate those concepts have basically kind of gone down the direction of, we're going to use this to make sure that the staff that we have are only really there for maybe short periods of time when they're actually kind of facilitating that guest journey. And then we're going to kind of operate this hotel with as few staff as possible. Now, I don't think that that should be the dominant model for hospitality. Right. And I don't think that, for example, if you're operating a kind of luxury experience, that's the way that you should do it. But it is an application of what you can do with our system.
Right. Do you feel like this sort of self-help kind of model became even more popular after COVID? Or was this something that you were already focusing on? Because I mean, obviously after COVID, people were just like picking up like self-checkout, picking up food without talking to anybody. All this stuff just sort of changed in these last 2 or 3 years. So was this a vision that you had before that or because of that?
No. This was all like in 2012. We'd already kind of every single thing that we basically started building was, way before that. The pandemic kind of just accelerated it. And it's, know, why we've been growing like crazy over the last, 2 or 3 years. But I always believed in the way that if you think about it, basically, if you look at other industries or other ways that this has kind of happened, I think it's a natural way to actually kind of operate certain types of businesses. Basically, I think that, to my point about being a night receptionist, if you think about the kind of dominant employment model that you actually see, and staffing is the biggest cost that hotels actually have. So for example, me as a night receptionist, I would be paid for, let's say, 8 hours shift, but my actual work was basically being done in the first 2 hours when I was actually kind of welcoming people, when I was asking them how their night was, if there's anything that I can do basically to kind of facilitate their experience the next day. That's what a night receptionist basically should be doing. They should be kind of facilitating that feeling of hospitality. The fact that I was then there and I was just sitting on my own, doing a night audit process for 2 hours, that's not value added work. You don't need a human to do that basically. And that's not great human work. And then me basically kind of sitting there from, let's say, kind of 2 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. waiting for somebody to actually kind of change a shift with me. That also basically just isn't great human work. But, that's why the wages in this industry are so depressed, basically, because the things that we need humans to do, which is those kind of 2 or 3 hours of really, really dedicated, great human empathy, like all of those things that basically animate hospitality, we're having to kind of pay people less for that very high value service because we also need them to kind of function as essentially data processing machines and keep security cameras as cheap as possible. So you end up, for those 2 hours of real work, having to employ someone for 8 hours, basically. And it's not just a good kind of business model, basically, for this industry, because as wages grow, you kind of think like, well, why would somebody choose to have that type of job? And I think that we can come up with a much better technology assisted way of actually kind of staffing our hotels and think about, how you can actually kind of get to better profits.
Well, going back to COVID and just how people really had to adapt to the changes sort of suddenly, I'm sure you encountered challenges in building this business. I mean, this is kind of a strange model. It's a new model. So people probably weren't ready to accept the fact that maybe a human wasn't going to be there to do a particular job. Were there challenges like that, or were there other challenges that you faced?
I think that there's like always different kind of challenges. I think that most of it is just that people have an idea of how a hotel should be operated. And at the end of the day, like if you want to kind of operate a hotel in a standard way, you can use Mews basically for that. I think that we just like to pride ourselves on actually facilitating the most profitable hotels that actually really, really think about how am I driving the highest amount of profit? So how am I driving the highest amount of revenues? We think that that's basically kind of by having people that are focused on sales and focused on revenue rather than focused on supplanting basically some kind of administrative function. So when you're paying people basically like a receptionist, they should be selling, they should be upselling services. They should be, really, really kind of focused on the guest experience. That should be their employment method or the reason for why they're employed. And same thing with costs. You shouldn't be spending money on things that can be really, really easily automated. And I think what's difficult is that sometimes when people have been kind of, this is a fairly old industry and the technology that we use is fairly old in itself. So people have, gone their entire lives using specific technology in a specific way for a really, really long time. And I think that was also kind of the learning that most people actually kind of took out of COVID is that, maybe we do need a different model. Maybe like these are assets with prime real estate, basically. Like, why were they empty when, for example, service departments were completely full? Why is it that we are not able to, for example, reuse this prime real estate to facilitate other types of demand? Why is it only when people are basically traveling or when airports are open that we're able to actually kind of generate revenue? When you look at hotels, there's ways to actually kind of make money out of the assets that a hotel has. You don't need to kind of wait for a hotel or an airport to open to actually bring you those guests, basically, in order for you to actually make money off those assets.
Right. So you mean like the other amenities that they would have, like private events or whatever it might be. So do you have any advice for other people who might be listening that want to start in very niche industry like you have?
Basically, like what helped us was, I think this is basically the way of most startups. You focus on a specific niche or a specific thing, and then you change the entire industry in that way. I think that when you see Mews, basically we have lots of very luxury hotels that operate with Mews, but they operate in a different way. They operate in a way basically that's much more tied towards revenue and much basically kind of focused on how do they actually kind of make sure that they're doing the most with the assets that they have. And so the actual kind of revenue per square meter that they're able to get is much higher than if they're just using a standard PMS and things like that. And I think that that's really kind of the way that I'd probably advise other entrepreneurs to think about it is, when you kind of get, especially in Europe, now we have in certain parts, 35% of certain markets, basically, that we have in terms of the number of rooms that we actually kind of help facilitate and things like that. I think that's where every single entrepreneur should be thinking about, where can I actually kind of start from? What's the niche that I can start from? But how can that actually kind of then create huge amounts of value over the entire industry, basically? That's, I think, the main kind of model of today's kind of tech entrepreneurship as well.
Can you give us a glimpse into the future plans and the vision that you have for Mews?
We are at this point the most well-funded technology company basically in space. I think that in terms of our market dominance, I think especially in Europe, it's probably the most kind of dominant system. And we're hoping to do the same thing basically here in the US as well. From that perspective, it's going really, really well. I think for us, we want to kind of reshape the way that people think about the optimal way to actually kind of run hotels. So we want to be known as the system that the best hotels basically run on. And I think with that, we see a huge amount of traction now with, for example, some of the kind of bigger brands as well. So not just the S&B kind of segment that I think we dominated really, really well now, especially with the mid-market. And I think we've got some really, really good traction with some of the global brands as well, basically. So it's kind of, the standard thing for most entrepreneurs, it's, world domination.
Well, it's exciting. There's so much happening every year. It feels like with technology, things are advancing so fast. So I'm sure you're going to have plenty to sink your teeth into. Let our listeners know where they can read more about Mews and contact you. How can we get in touch with you on the internet?
You can find me on LinkedIn, go through www.mews.com as our website, and you can come to any of our events that we host. So we like to meet people in person. We like to always stand out from the crowd at any events that we're at. So whether it's high tech or any of these other types of events. And pretty soon we'll be coming to a city near you, because we like to kind of make sure that we bring the promise of what the technology can actually kind of do so that everyone can actually kind of experience it as well.
Wonderful. That's exciting. Well, we look forward to having you on again. I feel like things are moving fast for you and we can't wait to hear more. Thanks for joining us so much today, Richard. And to our listeners, please subscribe for future episodes, leave reviews, and stay connected with Travelpreneur. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks so much.